What occurs when familial lines intersect too closely? When cousins wed cousins repeatedly over generations? When siblings grow up in isolation and ultimately become partners? When a child is born from a mother who was once her father's daughter? These narratives do not originate from medieval Europe or remote villages. They arise from within America. Currently, in regions of West Virginia, Texas, the Dakotas, and even in major urban centers, there are women enduring the lifelong repercussions of inbreeding. Not by choice, but by birth. Some were born with features that genetics could not conceal. Others never acquired the ability to speak. A few were never even assigned proper names. This video narrates their experiences. We are not discussing myths or urban legends. These are verified cases, some concealed by families, others revealed through medical examinations or social workers. In each instance, the women were born into a lineage too close for nature to rectify. You may have heard of royal incest or witnessed fictional portrayals in crime dramas. But what if I informed you that there are American women, either living or recently deceased, whose entire lives were influenced by incestuous relationships between siblings, cousins, or even between parent and child? This is not a matter of judgment. It is a matter of reality. In the following minutes, you will hear 5 stories. One woman was born in a mountain town so secluded that her entire family communicated solely through grunts. Another, the result of a father-daughter relationship, never walked independently. Some were raised in silence. Others were buried in it. These are America's most inbred women, and their stories have remained concealed until now. Gracie Irene Whitaker was born circa 1920 in the peculiar West Virginia, a name that aptly reflects its narrative. Her parents were first cousins, and their parents were twin brothers. This lineage meant that Gracie entered the world with a significant amount of shared DNA. However, her narrative did not end there. She subsequently married her own double cousin, John Emery Whitaker, who was genetically nearly as close as a sibling. In a secluded Appalachian community where isolation was commonplace and outsiders were infrequent, unions like theirs were not uncommon. They were anticipated. Together, Gracie and John had 15 children. Most of them never acquired the ability to speak. Many were unable to read or write. Several exhibited visible physical deformities, such as misaligned eyes, distorted facial features, and uncoordinated motor skills. At least one child could only express themselves through grunts. Locals murmured about the family, labeling them as odd or touched, yet no one intervened. This was backwoods West Virginia in the early 20th century, poor, neglected, and isolated. Medical records were limited. No one identified the genetic complications. However, as the children matured, the pattern became unmistakable. Generations of consanguinity had accumulated, and Gracie's children bore the consequences in both their bodies and minds. Despite the evident difficulties, Gracie never departed from odd. She lived and passed away in the same residence, surrounded by the family she had nurtured, many of whom struggled to function independently. She never communicated with the media. No outsider truly understood her thoughts. Yet, through the individuals she brought into existence, Gracie became the living embodiment of one of the most extreme instances of familial inbreeding ever recorded in the United States. To this day, some of her descendants continue to inhabit the same land. Although many Americans may not recognize her name, Gracie Whitaker's legacy endures in the faces, voices, and silence of those she left behind. Lorien was not merely born into the Whitaker family, she was born deeply embedded in its genetic lineage. She was the offspring of Gracie and John Emery Whitaker, who were themselves double cousins. This meant that the same DNA was repeatedly circulating, compressing over generations. She entered the world in the 1940s in the same rural home where her mother had been born. However, something was amiss. From an early age, Lorien faced challenges. She was unable to speak. She struggled to concentrate. Her eyes did not track movement as those of other children did. Her muscles were weak and her movements were uncoordinated. She never acquired reading skills, did not attend a formal school, and seldom left the family's secluded property. Neighbors, those few who lived nearby, referred to her as slow or simple. Yet, the reality was more profound. Lorien was not merely developmentally delayed, she was likely severely intellectually disabled, a consequence of repeated consanguinity. Tests conducted decades later on living relatives validated what doctors had suspected. The Whitaker bloodline had reached a genetic tipping point. Lorien's existence remained confined to the family property. She never married, never held a job, and never lived independently. Most of her interactions were restricted to family members who shared similar conditions. Her world was a closed circuit. No formal diagnosis was ever established. No government agency intervened. In the Appalachian backwoods during the mid-20th century, families such as the Whitakers lived on the periphery, unnoticed and forgotten. By the time Lorraine passed away, likely in her 40s or 50s, there was no obituary, no public record, only silence. Another life constrained and defined by a lineage that perpetually repeated itself. Her narrative, akin to many others from her family, could have completely disappeared, but in the remnants that persist, we observe the true toll of repeated genetic encounters. Rita was born in Texas around 2010. However, her story does not commence in a hospital. It starts in a concealed room within a house that no one wished to examine closely. Her mother was merely a teenager and also the biological daughter of the man who fathered Rita. This was not immediately uncovered. The infant girl was small, born prematurely, and struggled to breathe. Medical professionals noted several warning signs. Her facial structure appeared unusual and her heartbeat was irregular. Yet it was only after a comprehensive genetic test, prompted by unexplained bruising, that the reality was revealed. Her mother and father were also daughter and father. The test disclosed extensive areas of identical DNA, a phenomenon typically observed in cases of first-degree incest. This was not a marriage between cousins. This was biological replication at a level that precipitates the most severe consequences: congenital anomalies, neurological impairments, and lifelong dependence. As Rita matured, the indications became unmistakable. She remained silent, exhibiting not only delays in speech but also a lack of verbal communication. Walking posed a challenge for her, necessitating ongoing physical therapy. A rare heart defect was diagnosed and she underwent surgery for a cleft lip, subsequently developing hydrocephalus, which is characterized by fluid accumulation in the brain. To alleviate the pressure, a shunt was inserted. By the time she reached 4 years of age, both of her biological parents were incarcerated. Her mother attempted to rationalize the relationship as love, however, the law and the state recognized it for what it truly was: child abuse perpetuated into another generation. Rita became a ward of the state and was placed in a long-term care facility located in Houston. Now a teenager, she remains nonverbal. Her motor control is limited and she experiences significant cognitive delays. The uncertainty of her future looms large as she requires full-time care and will likely continue to do so indefinitely. Rita exemplifies the consequences of incest, which transcends mere abuse to become a biological reality. Her narrative is not a myth, it is not a cautionary tale from bygone days. It is a tangible reality, recent and ongoing, within a locked care facility that most Texans are unaware of. Maria was born in the mid-1970s within a Hutterite colony in South Dakota, a secluded and deeply religious community that cherished tradition, simplicity, and endogamy. Her parents were second cousins, part of a long-standing history of intermarriage within the group. This was not viewed as scandalous but rather as a means of cultural continuity. At birth, Maria exhibited signs of a rare condition, including a recessed chin, misshapen ears, and a cleft palate. Later, doctors would diagnose her with Treacherous syndrome, a genetic disorder impacting the development of facial bones and tissues. Although not exclusively linked to inbreeding, the likelihood of this condition manifesting was increased in genetically isolated populations. Unlike many others born into closely knit genetic circles, Maria's cognitive abilities remained intact. Despite her hearing impairment, her intelligence was unaffected. She acquired skills in reading, signing, and navigating the small educational system of her colony. The Hutterites did not shun her, their beliefs prioritized compassion for the vulnerable, and Maria became recognized not for her disability but for her determination. She utilized a hearing aid, underwent surgeries to enhance certain features, and ultimately took on the role of a caregiver for younger children in the colony. Her situation was documented in a medical journal not due to being the most severe case, but because it illustrated the latent dangers of even remote inbreeding when compounded over generations. Now in her 50s, Maria continues to reside in the same colony. She married a distant cousin outside the Atrasis gene pool and has 2 healthy offspring. She is regarded as a survivor rather than a victim. Maria's narrative is unique. It demonstrates that not all instances of consanguinity result in misfortune, yet everyone is at risk. Her visage reflects her heritage. However, her existence affirms that with adequate support and access to healthcare, genetics do not dictate the entirety of one's life. Linda was born in Houston in 2011 to a couple who were first cousins. They were recent arrivals from the Middle East, where cousin marriage is culturally accepted and even promoted in certain communities. In their context, it was not considered taboo. It was a tradition. However, genetics did not take culture into account. From the moment of her birth, Linda faced challenges. She was born slightly premature, exhibiting muscle weakness, difficulties with feeding, and subtle physical variations. Initially, doctors were unable to determine the cause. Yet, as developmental delays became increasingly apparent, genetic testing was recommended. The findings confirmed the situation. Linda's parents had a considerable amount of identical DNA indicative of first-degree cousin pairing. This indicated that their daughter had a significantly elevated risk of inheriting 2 copies of detrimental genes. And that is precisely what transpired. As she matured, Linda encountered numerous health complications. She was diagnosed with a missing kidney, suffered from frequent seizures, and had difficulties with speech. Her head circumference remained abnormally small, a condition known as microcephaly, and her learning abilities lagged considerably behind those of her peers. By the age of 6, she was enrolled in a specialized classroom designed for children with intellectual disabilities. Her parents remained dedicated, yet felt overwhelmed. They informed doctors that they had never been cautioned about the genetic risks involved. They perceived her condition as a manifestation of God's will. Culturally, they did not regard their marriage as atypical. Today, at 14 years old, Linda attends school part-time and participates in therapy sessions almost every week. She is capable of forming simple sentences but continues to struggle with reading and writing. Her IQ is approximately 70. While functionally limited, she is not nonverbal. She resides at home, heavily dependent on her parents for assistance. Linda's situation is not uncommon. As genetic testing becomes increasingly available, more cases similar to hers are being recorded throughout America, particularly in communities where tradition intersects with science. Her narrative is not one of blame.